Welcome to sunny Scarborough and the National Lottery Heritage funded Southcliffe Gardens Restoration Project. I'm Vicky Thompson, I'm the Project Officer and your host to this online Gardens Question Time event focusing on heritage gardens as part of the Heritage Open Days Festival. So without further ado, let's introduce our exciting panel of experts. Hello everyone, please can you tell us who you are and a little bit about what you do?
My name is James Alexander Sinclair. People say to me, what are you? Who are you? What do you do? I'm a gardener. I'm a gardener. I've been gardening for really quite a long time now. And I started off as a landscaper in London. So I started off by laying paving and putting up fences and pushing wheelbarrows and all those kind of things. And then somehow, by a mixture of bluff and endeavor, I have managed to get myself into a position where nice people like you ask me to come and talk about things.
Well, I'm Gary Webb. I've been working in the sort of field of gardening and horticulture for 30 something years. I'll leave it at that. And I've generally speaking, I've sort of developed a bit of a niche in sort of heritage gardens. I'm very interested in history and the natural landscape and all things sort of wild and historic and those sort of environments really.
Hi, I'm Denise Seckham. I'm head gardener here at Castle Bromage Historic Gardens. We're a 10-acre walled garden restored to the English formal design of 1680 to 1760. We're on the outskirts of Birmingham and are an urban oasis for our city dwellers of Solihull and Birmingham.
So I'm Doug Stewart. I work for myself as a horticultural consultant, professional associate to the RHS. I do a lot of training and education work in horticulture all over the country. I blog, plantenthusiast.com, so there we are. So I'm a blogger and I am a plant nerd. And I'm an unashamed, enthusiastic, total, complete and utter plant nerd.
Great stuff. Thank you everyone for volunteering your time. Now let's jump into the questions. So I asked the public to submit any burning questions that they had that focus specifically on heritage gardens, and this is what we got through. So the first question comes from Ken in Whitby, and Ken says, do you think heritage gardening techniques, for example, double digging, should be replaced with more environmental techniques such as no-dig so that us gardeners can do our bit to save the planet? Or do you think it's a load of old rubbish?
Oh, I love this. So I'm involved day to day in teaching students. And one of the things that we're saying to them is let's look at the science, let's look at the facts, and then let's look at how all the horticultural techniques that we learn as being right, do they fit with the facts and our understanding of the world today? And I think you cannot argue with Charles Dowding, who is the man behind No Dig. And I've spoken to him at length about this, and he will say, look, here's an area of my garden. And I remember he explained an area where a JCB had been digging, it was rutted, there were, puddles, there were all the problems. And he was saying, right, half of it we're going to dig and we're going to, get rid of the water and we're going to remove the compaction. We're going to do all these things that we should do that sort of normal horticulture tells us we should do. Then the other, we're going to do the no dig, and no dig is misunderstood because actually instead of digging, we put on about 200 mils, about 8 inches of well-rotted compost on the top of the soil. And then the idea is the worms do the digging and everything else, but it doesn't work if you don't do that 200 mils of organic material. And which side had the highest yield? Which side grew best? Which side did the plants love? Yes, the one that wasn't dug. And that went against everything that I have ever believed to be true. And then you start to read about carbon in the soil, and about 70%, they reckon, of the carbon that has been stored in the soil has been taken away, is gone because of the very poor farming practices that we have. And if we don't dig, we don't, or let's say if we do dig, what we do when we're doing the double digging is we're releasing pockets of carbon dioxide into the air, because all the little critters that are living in the soil, they've been breathing out. So we're releasing that. And then we're allowing air to get in, the organic matter, the humus in the soil. So that breaks down more quickly and that reduces the carbon even more. Whereas if what we do is add 8 inches of organic material to the soil and then plant into that, and we do that every year and the worms pull it down, slowly the soil is holding more and more and more carbon. And it depends. If you read publications by people that like soil, they're saying the whole answer to climate change in the world could be by changing the way that we manage soil so that the soil becomes this huge carbon sink. So that's a long way of saying, I do still teach students how to double dig because I think they need to know how to do it. Would I do it anymore myself? No. I have totally converted to the no dig gardening because I've seen the results and I can't deny them. I don't like it. I want to dig, but actually it's better not to.
I live in the Cotswolds and I'm planting a new hedge in my wild hillside garden. What are the best fruiting things to put in my hedgerow that represent Old England? I'm especially interested in wild food. Somebody suggested a mulberry, but I think they are American.
Mulberry's an interesting one. I think, yeah, I think it's the red mulberry. I think that's American. I think the white one's sort of China, from over that way. So yeah, they're certainly not native. So although they, you know, might be a good addition to a hedgerow, they're not native. So if you're just looking for purely native, and assuming there's lots of space and it's sort of a hillside plot, I think the classic sort of plants and the key one would be the hawthorn. I think the hawthorn would figure in most as a solid plant within most of the hedgerows. On top of that, there's a whole range of things you can add to that. Really, you can add some of the sort of from a nut point of view. You could go with the hazels. You could add hazels into that. The dog rose, you could plant that within. And you know, there's various other things that you could add into that, which would not necessarily, you could harvest them and take them into the kitchen, but the other things like dogwoods that you could add in as well. So there is quite a range. And again, just to give a bit of shelter and sort of bring the bird life in, you could add some evergreens, get some hollies into there as well to get some more berries. So you'd need to sort of know what you're harvesting over the fullness of time, but there's a lot of options there for certain.
Awesome, thanks Gary. That's some good planting advice there. The next question is for Denise, and it's from Florence in Stratford, and she says, what does a Baroque garden look like and what makes it identifiable as a Baroque garden? Good question.
So a Baroque garden is basically man's mastery over nature. Lots of sweeping views and vistas. We have long gravel, what they call alleyways. We have shrubs that are pruned to very formal cylinders, spheres, pyramids. We have an elaborate parterre. The garden's terraced because all the best Baroque features are viewed from above. And we have pavilions where visitors old and new can shelter in inclement weather or just use the space for entertaining.
That's really interesting and sounds enchanting, but I bet it takes a lot of looking after. Thanks, Denise. So the next question is for James, and it comes from Lisa in East Yorkshire. And Lisa says, I was completely caught out by lockdown. I ran out of wine. I'm now seriously debating if I can grow a vineyard in my back garden in case COVID persists. I have a 10 metre by 20 metre lawn space with a prehistoric trampoline, my husband's stack of bricks and a cement mixer. Oh, and a rotting sofa he's promised to take to the skip for over 2 years now. I have no horticultural skills, however, I have a limited enthusiasm for gardening if a vineyard is possible. It's self-facing and we have sandy soil.
Sort of interesting mixture of extreme pessimism, I'm going to grow a vineyard in case COVID persists, and extreme optimism in that she knows nothing and understands less, basically. Okay, so how many vineyards are there in Yorkshire? Yeah, that's the first thing that one has to think of. Where are most vineyards? Most vineyards are on the sun-baked slopes of the Mediterranean, or California, or in Burgundy, or the Côte de Rhône, and all that kind of stuff. Very seldom does one go into a restaurant and say, "Can I have a bottle of Scunthorpe, please?" It doesn't happen very often. Therefore, I feel that for a start, she's beginning with a disadvantage. However, that said, you know, the climate is changing, sadly, and things could happen. And she has a south-facing slope with sandy soil. All of these things are good. It's quite interesting about vineyards, in that there are some quite good vineyards in the south of England. And if you look at the geological strata, they're on the same soil as the vineyards of Champagne, and it comes underneath the channel and comes the same thing. So it's the same. Anyway, that's it. Does not go as far as Yorkshire. Okay, that, I'm afraid, is one of the things that you have to understand. So she wants to grow wine. I think that's marvelous. You know, you can grow wine. You can make wine out of rhubarb, don't you? And rhubarb is something that you can grow in Yorkshire. So she may be better off if she wants wine and she wants it fast rhubarb. Because if you're going to start growing a vineyard, you start with a little thing, and then there's a lot of pruning, and there's a lot of structure, and a lot of things to happen, and you're not going to get any wine out of it at all for, I don't know, 5 to 10 years. And if COVID is still here in 10 years' time, then my God, we're in trouble. Really. So my advice to Lisa is, yes, of course, grow vines. Grow vines, they're marvelous, lovely things to have. Don't grow too many of them expecting to be creating Chateau Lisa, or even actually what we could do is that we could name it after the most important feature in her garden. So we're going to call it Chateau Rotting Sofa. Because the rotting sofa is not going anywhere in a hurry. So yes, Lisa, go ahead, grow vines, but think of other things that you could possibly make alcohol out of, like parsnips or rhubarb or apples or pears or anything at all.
I think you're right. I think making wine from other things possibly is the right idea. Thanks, James. Next question is from David in Malton, and he says, which are the best nurseries in Yorkshire to buy heritage roses? You know, the real ones that actually smell, because otherwise what's the point in growing roses? I would agree with you, David, there. Also, what is your favourite scented heritage rose? Tricky question.
Oh, David. Well, if you're in Malton, then you're not far from Rogers, are you? Rogers of Pickering, and they have to be one of the best Yorkshire nurseries for buying roses. But come on, David, you know, as a Yorkshireman, the best nursery is the one that's got the sale on today. So there you are. It's all about price. Now, what about this kind of best rose? And I love roses that have a scent. And I think they lost their scent for a while when we were breeding in disease resistance and we fell in love with hybrid teas. But now we've gone back to more the shrub roses. And David Austin have done so much work plant breeding. And can I have two, David, that I really love? As a climber, I absolutely adore Gloire de Dijon, which has yellow flowers and, oh, the scent. It's just phenomenal. And I have this little open fronted shed in the garden, summer house. And I've always wanted this Gloire de Dijon to sort of be growing over it and sort of to festoon it. And it always dies. And it gets black spot and it gets everything and it gets thinner and smaller as years go on. So I can't grow it. But in my perfect garden, in my fantasy garden, like fantasy football, that would be one of my plants. And the other one, you know, because we're up in Yorkshire, it has to be named after a Yorkshire garden. And the other one is the Rose Harlow Carr. It's a lovely pink shrub rose, and it smells, actually, I think it smells even stronger than we expect a normal sort of English heritage rose to smell. And so it's got the name of one of Yorkshire's greatest gardens. It's got an amazing perfume. It's got a lovely sort of soft pink colour. It's the colour that the garden designer, John Brooks, used to call old ladies' bloomers. It's that sort of pink.
I kind of feel the need to go out and buy a couple of roses at the weekend now. I think you sold them pretty well, and there's a little bit of me that has a bit of gardening competitiveness where I kind of want to see if I can grow something that you cannot. Okay, so next question is from Simon in Newcastle. We're going north. What's your favourite heritage tool and why?
I think the classic would have to be the pruners, good old pair of secateurs. I think from a gardening perspective, if you've got a holster with one of those in, you know, you can pretty much tackle most jobs on a daily basis, even opening parcels when they arrive with some new plants in. But I think heritage-wise as well, I sort of look to the scythe as one that's sort of regaining in sort of popularity. I've sort of, having undertook a course, I sort of got hold of one about 4 or 5 years ago now. And initially they're hard work. They're still quite hard work, actually. You always get sweat on when you're using the scythe. But when you see somebody using one well, the technique it's wonderful to watch. And the benefits for me in terms of using mine is I don't have to get the strimmer out of the shed. I'm not pouring fuel into the scythe. You know, it's pretty much sharp stone scythe, and away you go. And you can get really quite artistic with them if you really push it. But as a basic tool for controlling undergrowth, weeds, small areas of meadow, I wouldn't want to oversell it. I think the scythe is a really, really good one, and it's certainly due a resurgence that it's getting at the moment. So yeah, I'd go with the scythe.
So the next question is from George in Pickering, and he says, how do you think we treated for pests before the use of chemicals? What did your predecessors do?
They probably use cultural controls. We're moving more towards cultural controls these days and trying to use less chemicals, as it's not good for the environment. The first thing is the right plant in the right place, because stress plants often succumb to pests and diseases. We do monitoring of pests constantly, so if we find a small infestation we can either pick it off, or for things like greenfly, if there's a larger infestation we can use a soap solution to get rid of them. For our larger pests, a barrier control method is what we use. So things like the cabbage white butterfly can't lay eggs if we put netting around the crop. And things like squirrels who try and dig up the bulbs, if we put a galvanised wire mesh over the top, they can't do that.
Great range of tips there. Thank you, Denise. Really appreciate that. The next question comes from Anne in Scarborough on the South Cliff. She's one of mine, and she says, what do you think are the best Edwardian plants to use as focal points in a coastal setting? I didn't pay her to ask that question.
What's an Edwardian plant? Okay, an Edwardian plant is so if we think back to the Edwardian era, we're thinking back to Jekyll and Lutyens and all of that kind of stuff. And again, like I said before, the problem is the fact that they were operating with a much smaller palette of plants than the ones that we have. So the things that we would use, you know, as a you know, anything, things that we all know that they may well not have heard of. I mean, okay, for example, there were catmints in the pieces that Jekyll used quite a lot of, but it was pretty bog standard catmint. And now we've got, you know, there's a yellow catmint, which is Nipetica vineyana. There's Dawn's Dust, which is pink. There's various other pink ones. There are short ones. There are tall ones. There are ones that spread ridiculously. There are ones that cats just can't resist and come and lie luxuriantly in it and ruin the entire thing. So that's just one variety of plant, and there are many, many others. So focal points in a coastal setting. The standard thing that you would find in a focal point in the coastal setting is probably one of those spiky jobs. So sort of phormiums or yuccas or all that sort of thing. That's the sort of thing that you would see walking through a park on a beachfront. That said, I have to make a large confession at this point. for which I beg your forgiveness. I've never been to Scarborough. I have never been there, and it looks nice if you just move out of the way a bit. You see, it's lovely. It's a beautiful, beautiful place, and I would expect an invitation very soon. But you know, most coastal gardens are that sort of bedding plants and lots of colour and all of that kind of stuff, which I'm sure that is sort of part of what we're going to. But we're getting to the Edwardian era. We're just twisting away from that Victorian bedding thing, and we're getting into a more naturalistic feel to it. Which again will work much better on your sort of slope. But the variety of plants. So yes, you do have the sort of classic, the phormiums and the cordylines and the trachycarpus and all of those things, all that sort of palm tree thing, because that's what people wanted. They come to the sea. They wanted something different to where they to what they had growing at home. So they have something exotic, something exciting, something interesting. So they always work. Interesting point. The phormium, which is a New Zealand plant, New Zealand flax, was used as body armor there was a war between the invading British and the Maoris in about 18 something, and they worked out that if you made a jacket out of phormium, quite thickly layered, it would stop a musket ball, so that it would a bullet would bounce off it. So it's a precursor of a Kevlar bulletproof vest. Anyway, that's absolutely nothing to do with Edwardian plants as focal points. What you have to also bear in mind is that I guess all coastal places are windy and blowy, and so trees tend to grow like that rather than like that. You can make a feature out of that, and that's quite sort of. You want something that either will bend with the wind, which means that grasses are quite interesting in coastal setting because they're strong enough to actually take that movement, but it's not what I would call a heritage plant in any way, shape or form. So it doesn't really come as an Edwardian plant, but hey, who cares? If it works and it looks nice, it doesn't really matter. Tamarisk is, I'm not sure if it'll work in Scarborough, but down on the south coast, very, very good coastal plant. You know, look up in the RHS book, there's lots of them. But the thing is that it comes back to this whole thing that we've been talking about along, is that you don't have to stick exactly to what was there, because there are many other things that you can add to it.
That's a really good answer. Thank you very much. So the next question is from Lewis, and he's in Scarborough. He's one of ours, and he says, do you know when the garden shed was invented?
I don't know if it was. You see, I don't know if the garden shed really was invented, because I think what happened is people had barns. So the kind of big farmers would have barns and things like that, and you'd keep your tools and everything else. And then I think probably at some stage the gardener said, it's an awfully long way to go. Can I have my own little barn? And sometimes in the old walled gardens, we have tool sheds on the other side of the wall as part of a kind of that horticultural heritage. And maybe some of those, you know, there was an apple store. Often in the warmest bit, there was the mess room. And I think there would be a tool shed or something like that. So I think sheds just sort of slowly happened, and they evolved from barns, and they just became smaller and nowadays really essential. You know, houses don't have enough storage, and we need sheds. And oh, I love my shed. And one of the things, Vicky, that I was taught very early on when I started to do the gardening program on Radio Humberside was, and I don't know if this ever would apply to you, but every woman needs a shed, somewhere to go and clear her head and work out what he said, and sometimes wish that he was. Anyway, I think we want to move on to the next question.
So the humble shed is not only a storage vessel for tools and machinery, and in my case, a few vats of homebrew, but it's also the saviour for many a relationship. Brilliant. I love that. Thanks, Doug. So the next question comes from Leslie. She says, are there any heritage herbs that we do not grow anymore that you think we should?
I quite like betony, which is a hedge nettle, its common name. We now grow it as a meadow wildflower plant, but back in the day it was a herb that was used for pretty much everything and anything, including curing drunkenness. It's a low growing plant that has really pretty purple flower spires which start in July and flower all the way to September. So I think this betony should be grown a little bit more than maybe it is today.
The next question is anonymous. It's an anonymous submission from Hull. And this person says, are there any plants we used to grow to eat, but we no longer do that you feel need to make a comeback? I'd like to impress my mates down the allotment. The one-upmanship is out of control and there's not a lot left to pull out the bag. I'm asking for a friend.
Okay. Have you eaten hostas? There you go. The hosta, when it first shoots, it sends out this little sort of wrapped up leaf. You can cut them off and eat them. Have you eaten ferns?
No, I have not.
Crozier of a fern. When a fern first starts growing, it's the frond is all curled over, so it looks like there's a stick that a bishop holds. So they're called croziers. And they're a bit of a delicacy in America. And you cut them off, and they're called fiddlehead ferns, and you basically fry them, and you can eat them. Daylily plants. The flower of a daylily actually tastes quite good and quite interesting. So one of the things, a small proviso that you have to understand here, there is a very distinct difference between edible, which means something that you can eat, and palatable, meaning something that you would actually want to eat. Okay, so all of those things, you can eat them, but whether you actually want to eat them is another matter entirely if you're not starving, and you might actually be much better off going and getting a pizza. Actually, and that would probably make your friends on the allotment much happier if you appeared with a pizza rather than trying to say, oh, look, try my hosta. It's delicious. Okay? Oh, how about a serving of fern? No? Just go to Domino's and buy something for them. It would be a much better way of doing it.
The next question comes from Katie in North Yorkshire, and Katie says, is it better to grow heritage varieties of vegetables or modern versions, and where is a good place to buy heritage seeds?
There's no easy answer to this question, I don't think. Heritage vegetables are brilliant. They introduce genetic diversity. They look unusual, they can taste unusual, and they must be a good crop because they've been passed down through generations. But modern plant breeders have introduced disease resistance into their modern crops, and also easier to grow. They don't bolt so quick, so I can understand why people would like to grow them. So there is no easy answer to that question. I also get my seeds from the Real Seed Company because they're open pollinated, so I can save the seeds and then sow them in future years. And Thomas Etty Esquire is a pretty cool website. They have really good garden descriptions of the plants and a very oldie worldy English thing going on, which is pretty fun.
Good answer to a tough question, I reckon. Thank you, Denise. So the next question is to Gary, and it's from Rachel in Bradford. Rachel says, since having kids, I'm really conscious about climate change. I'm not a gardener, but I have a vision to create a wild meadow in my garden for the insects and my kids to enjoy. It's currently just a lawn. Being a mother, I have very little time to get outdoors, and someone told me the easiest way to help the wildflowers grow in my lawn is by planting yellow rattle. Is this good advice?
It is good advice. Yeah, I think for good reason. Yellow rattle's known as the meadow maker, or called that by some people. And the reason for that really is because it's semi-parasitic as a plant. It's an annual plant, but in the process of it growing, it will weaken the grass plants mostly. And as I understand, it creates space for meadow flowers to thrive. And certainly in my experience, where I've been able to get yellow rattle to establish, you can visibly see the grasses weaken, and what can go from being a very lush, thick grass sward can go to be can change to be a very thin one, and the flowers do actually thrive in that. So I think that the best way to go about growing that is to go down the seed route, is to actually sow seeds. You can get them as plugs. I've bought them and planted them, and they've grown successfully. But ultimately, what you're wanting to do is to get the seed to resow itself, the plant to resow itself each year. So autumn's the best time to do that. So if you can source the rattle seed, and you need to, in that sort of home garden situation, you would need to sort of create some spaces to get that seed to take. So a very strong rake through the grass, really trying to expose some of the soil and get some gaps there. Rake can clear it all off, sow the rattle seeds across there, and they'll need sort of a gentle roll in, maybe a lawnmower with a roller, or get the kids out there running up and down with their wellies on. And you're really just trying to firm it into the soil, and that will sit there and start to grow in the spring of the following year. And certainly by summertime, by June, July, you should be seeing you should have seen the yellow flowers, and those seed heads will be there, and they will be rattling, so you'll know whether you've been successful or not. But yellow rattle's the way to go, and that will open the way for other plants to come in as well.
I always wondered, so what if Rachel plants yellow rattle in her garden? How easily can it spread to next door? I've always wondered this when customers have said, will you do me some yellow rattle in my meadow? And I go, yeah, but look at next door's amazing striped lawn.
Yeah. I think it would really struggle, to be honest, to leap the fence in those sorts of situations. I think you have to work a bit to initially get it established. And I think I remember talking to a chap a few years ago who said we used to spray this off in the fields back in the farming days. It used to be one of the plants they weren't so keen on. But again, if they were stowing themselves and being turned over through ploughing and scarifying, that sort of thing, it was giving them just the conditions they needed to come back again the next year. So yeah, I think you'd be relatively safe, he says, touching wood.